Picture this. A single, highly flammable wooden ship is pitching violently in gale force winds.
Oh, terrifying.
Right. The hull is just groaning under the immense pressure of the Southern Ocean, and it's taking on water as the crew scrambles across the rigging.
And normally a ship caught in a storm like this, I mean, that's a tragedy just for the people on board.
Exactly. But if this specific ship goes down, an entire continent's newborn civilization literally starves to death.
It's an insane amount of pressure.
It really is. That was the terrifying reality for colonial Australia in the late 18th century. So, welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm so glad you could join us today.
It's a great topic today.
Yeah, today we are plunging into a massive stack of maritime archaeological reports, museum archives, historical society journals, and even first-hand diaries from the 1790s.
The primary sources on this are just incredible.
They really are. Our mission today is to figure out how the fate of an entire colonial endeavor hinged on one heavily flawed cargo ship, the HMS Sirius. We'll look at its role as a colonial lifeline, Captain John Hunter's harrowing experience wrecking the ship, his bizarre transition to colonial administrator, and the modern archaeological efforts that raised its secrets from the reef.
It's quite a journey.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the survival of the First Fleet in New South Wales seems to rely entirely on the Sirius, and yet, looking at her original blueprints, this was absolutely not a ship built for a grand imperial mission.
Oh, far from it. I mean, when we hear a title like Flagship of the First Fleet, the mind naturally conjures up an image of a sleek, heavily armed naval galleon cutting through the waves.
Right, like a pirate movie or something.
Exactly. But the reality of the Sirius is, well, it's much more utilitarian. This ship was born in 1780 as a merchantman.
Oh, so not even a military ship to start with.
No, not at all. It was specifically designed for the Baltic trade. She was originally named the Berwick, and she was built for hauling bulk cargo, like timber, not for, outmaneuvering enemy fleets. She was essentially a floating warehouse.
A slow, flat-bottomed workhorse.
A heavy one at that. She displaced anywhere from 510 to 540 tons.
Wow, that is massive.
Yeah, and the Royal Navy actually purchased her after she had survived a nasty fire. They refitted her, slapped on 10 guns, a mix of 4 6-pounders and 6 18-pounder carronades, and renamed her Sirius after the Dog Star.
But the guns were kind of an afterthought, right?
Pretty much. Her real value wasn't in her firepower at all. It was her immense storage capacity. To jumpstart a civilization at the edge of the known map, you need space.
Right, you have to bring literally everything with you.
Exactly. She had to carry agricultural equipment, scientific instruments like Captain Cook's famous Kendall K1 chronometer, and just enough baseline supplies to keep over 1,000 people alive.
And to her credit, she does it. I mean, she leads a fleet of 11 ships across 15,000 miles of ocean, arriving at Botany Bay and then Port Jackson in January of 1788.
Quite an achievement.
But the sources reveal a terrifying drop-off point right after they arrive. The other ships either leave or sink, and suddenly, the Sirius is the colony's sole connection to the outside world.
It's a very lonely position to be in.
Think about that for a second. Imagine you're setting up a lunar colony today, and the entire base relies on a single retrofitted cargo shuttle to bring you your groceries. It's this incredibly fragile umbilical cord.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Relying on one ship to keep an entire continent's population from starving seems like a massive, almost reckless oversight by the British Admiralty.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it was an immense logistical gamble, definitely. But it was one rooted in British naval doctrine of the era.
How so?
Well, the Admiralty leaned heavily on these adaptable merchant vessels to stretch their global reach without depleting their frontline warships.
Because they needed the warships closer to home for actual wars.
Precisely. But leaving a fledgling colony with essentially one major lifeline was undeniably precarious. And, it didn't take long for the gamble to fail. By October 1788, Sydney was facing total systemic collapse.
Because the colony was starving. The sources show the soil around Sydney Cove was brutally tough to farm.
Awful soil.
And the imported cattle had wandered off into the bush, and the local wildlife was just devouring whatever meager crops the settlers actually managed to sprout.
Which forces Governor Arthur Phillip into a really tight corner. He has to send Captain John Hunter and the Sirius on what is effectively the most desperate grocery run in human history.
Literally sailing around the world for flour.
Yeah. Hunter takes the ship eastward, plunging straight into the roaring 40s, navigating past New Zealand, around the treacherous tip of Cape Horn, and all the way across the Atlantic to Cape Town, South Africa, simply to purchase flour.
That journey alone is a miracle of navigation. I mean, the diaries mention a storm south of Tasmania on the return trip that was so violently intense, it ripped the ship's heavy wooden figurehead clean off the bow.
Just tore it right off.
And Hunter barely prevented the ship from being blown onto the rocks. But he makes it back to Sydney in May 1789. He unloads the flour, and the colony cheers. They're saved.
Well, temporarily saved.
Right.
Hunter's incredible 7-month circumnavigation was really just a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. Bringing back one holdful of flour didn't fix the underlying agricultural crisis in Sydney.
Because they were still stuck with the bad soil.
Exactly. Within months, those rations were dwindling again. So by early 1790, Governor Phillip realizes he can't just keep importing food. He has to export his starving population.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he makes the fateful decision to split the colony.
Right. He decides to send a massive chunk of the population, I think it was 275 convicts and Marines, to Norfolk Island, which is located hundreds of miles out in the Pacific, because the agriculture there was supposedly functioning better.
That was the hope anyway.
And he sends the Sirius alongside a much smaller armed tender called the HMS Supply to transport them.
They set off in March 1790. And they battled terrible weather the whole way, but they actually succeed in the first half of the mission. They managed to unload the passengers at Cascade Bay on Norfolk Island.
But the cargo's a different story.
Right. The problem is the heavy cargo. They can't unload the heavy provisions at Cascade Bay, so Hunter has to wait for the weather to shift before moving the Sirius around to Sydney Bay.
A spot on the island ominously known today as Slaughter Bay.
Yeah, the name says it all.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and honestly, where I need you to explain this to me. On March 19th, Hunter brings the ship in to unload the cargo. The wind suddenly shifts just 2 points to the south.
Just a tiny shift.
And within moments, the ship is doomed. But wait, Hunter is a master navigator. He just sailed this heavy, clunky cargo ship around the globe through the roaring 40s without a scratch.
It's true.
So how does he crash it on a reef in broad daylight, doing a routine drop-off, while the smaller ship, the Supply, manages to escape entirely?
It's a great question. It looks like catastrophic human error on paper, but it was actually a fatal trap set by the ship's own physical design.
How do you mean?
Well, we have to look at the terrifying physics of an 18th century square rigger. Like I said, the Sirius weighed over 500 tons. When that wind shifted those 2 points, the ship was suddenly caught on a lee shore.
A lee shore?
Yeah, meaning the wind is blowing forcefully from the open sea directly toward the land, so it's pushing the vessel toward the coral reef, and that was compounded by a massive onshore current.
So the environment is basically pushing them into a corner, but why can't he just steer out of it?
Because of how square rig sails function. They act like massive parachutes.
Oh, catching all that air.
Right. To turn the front of the ship, the bow through the wind, a maneuver called tacking, you need forward speed. The ship has to coast through the eye of the wind using sheer momentum until the wind catches the sails on the other side.
Okay, that makes sense.
The smallest ship, the Supply, was lighter and more maneuverable. It had the speed to punch through the wind and tack clear. The Sirius did not.
Because it was too heavy.
Too heavy, too sluggish, and fighting a brutal current. Hunter tries to tack, but the ship stalls out halfway through the turn.
Oh, no.
This is a terrifying phenomenon called missing stays. All forward momentum dies. The wind is now hitting the front side of those massive parachute-like sails, and this 500-ton wooden behemoth begins moving backward.
Completely out of control.
Completely out of control toward the reef.
I'm actually reading the diary entry here from Commandant Philip Gidley King, who was watching this unfold from the shore.
Oh, his account is chilling.
It is. He writes with this bizarre, stiff upper lip colonial restraint. He says, "At noon, the Sirius, having twice missed stays and being embayed, struck on the outer part of the reef."
So dry.
Right. But he goes on to describe the absolute dismay among the people watching. They viewed that ship as their sheet anchor. Their last hope for survival was literally reversing into a coral wall.
Hunter frantically tried one last maneuver. He tried to wear the ship.
What does that mean, to wear the ship?
It means giving up on pushing the bow through the wind and instead trying to turn the back of the ship, the stern, through the wind.
Okay.
He orders the anchor cut away, the halyards and sheets let go to spill the wind from the sails. But wearing a ship takes a lot of room.
And they were already on top of the reef.
Exactly. Room they didn't have. The physics were locked in. The Sirius slammed into the outer reef, and within a few brutal waves, she was bilged. The hull shattered.
It's just devastating. But they do manage to pull off an incredible rescue.
They do, yeah.
They string up a crude flying fox rope system, tying a line to a barrel, floating it through the crushing surf, securing it to a Norfolk pine tree, and dragging the crew ashore one by one.
Total miracle that no one drowned.
But this rescue triggers what has to be the darkest comedy of errors in maritime history.
Oh, the rum incident.
Yes. They managed to save the livestock, and a bunch of the convicts volunteer to help pull the animals ashore. But while doing so, these convicts stumble upon the ship's rum supply.
Of course they do.
They get completely intoxicated, chaos breaks out, and they end up starting a fire that destroys a massive chunk of the precious provisions they were desperately trying to salvage.
It's the absolute worst-case scenario unfolding in real time. The wrecking of the Sirius essentially doubled the population of Norfolk Island overnight.
While simultaneously putting most of their food supply at the bottom of the ocean or up in smoke.
Right. They actually only survived starvation in the following months because an enormous flock of migratory seabirds miraculously arrived on the island.
Oh, wow, just by chance.
Pure chance. And the stranded population hunted them to near extinction just to stay alive.
So the lifeline is severed.
Yeah.
Captain Hunter is stranded on Norfolk Island for 11 agonizing months, forced to look out at the rotting ribs of his beloved Flagship impaled on the reef.
That has to do something profound to a commander's psyche.
It really does. But eventually, a Dutch ship called the Waxhamheid picks him up. He returns to England, faces a mandatory court-martial for losing his ship, which, he is honorably acquitted of, and then, surprisingly, he gets a promotion.
He does. In 1795, John Hunter returns to Sydney Cove as the second governor of New South Wales, taking over the role from Arthur Phillip.
But it's not the same place he left.
No, the colony he sailed away from in 1790 is fundamentally not the colony he returns to.
Because nature abhors a vacuum. During Hunter's absence, this multi-year interregnum, the military took over the colony. Specifically, the New South Wales Corps, led by highly ambitious, ruthless officers like John MacArthur.
Oh, MacArthur was a piece of work.
While the official governors were away, this military faction built an entirely corrupt, monopolistic empire.
It was an entrenched, hyper-capitalist military oligarchy. Because the colony had no official physical currency, no minted coins to speak of, the officers of the Corps used their military pay lines to buy up all the cargo from arriving merchant ships before anyone else could.
That's so manipulative.
Right.
Yeah.
They created artificial scarcity, and then they paid for convict labor using rum as the currency.
They completely control the exchange rate. The sources show they were inflating the prices of imported goods by up to 700%.
It was pure extortion.
It's like a substitute teacher walking into a classroom where the students have been running the school for 3 years, they've established their own booming economy, they assign their own grades, and they absolutely refuse to give the chalkboard back to the teacher.
That analogy hits the nail on the head. What's fascinating here is how John Hunter's entire psychological makeup rendered him uniquely ill-equipped to handle this specific kind of subterranean political warfare.
How do you mean?
Look at his life up to 1795. He is a man of the naval quarterdeck. His entire worldview is structured around strict discipline, a completely unquestioned chain of command, and a deeply ingrained sense of duty.
Right.
If a captain gives an order, you execute it, or you face a court-martial.
But as a colonial governor dealing with the New South Wales Corps, giving an order means absolutely nothing if the officers just smile, nod, and then ignore you the moment you leave the room.
Precisely. The very traits that made him a brilliant naval officer, trusting his subordinates, relying on structural authority, made him incredibly vulnerable to political manipulation.
He didn't know how to play the game.
No. Hunter walks into Sydney expecting the military officers to fall in line. When they don't, his initial instinct is to try and compromise, to find a middle ground.
Which is a mistake with guys like MacArthur.
A huge mistake. He actually disobeys London's strict orders and allows the military officers to keep large numbers of convict servants, hoping this concession will appease them and bring them back into the fold.
But it just shows them he can be bent. It emboldens them. John MacArthur and his faction start running rings around Hunter. And the government back in London, specifically the Duke of Portland, is absolutely no help.
They're useless in this situation.
They are thousands of miles away, relying on delayed letters, completely out of touch with the reality on the ground. Portland is demanding Hunter-cut administrative costs, while simultaneously, John MacArthur is secretly writing letters to London, undermining Hunter's authority, painting him as weak and ineffective.
Hunter realizes too late that he is in a political knife fight. He tries to push back eventually.
What does he do?
He reinstates civil magistrates, trying to dilute the military's absolute control over the colonial courts. He attempts to regulate the rum trade to break their economic stranglehold, but he was consistently outmaneuvered.
He was a straightforward sailor trying to fight an entrenched political cartel.
And he lost. The letters from MacArthur did their damage, and Hunter was recalled to England in disgrace in 1799.
It is a genuinely tragic arc. The man circumnavigates the globe through the worst oceans on Earth to save a colony from starving, loses his ship to a freak wind shift and terrible physics, and ultimately gets fired because he doesn't know how to play dirty politics.
It's heartbreaking, really.
Now, he did eventually clear his name back in England, secured a pension, and lived out his days as a vice admiral. But while he was drinking tea in London, the physical remains of the Sirius were still out there, trapped in the coral of Slaughter Bay.
Sitting in the reef for almost 200 years. The wreck essentially became a structural part of the ocean floor, just waiting for the science of maritime archaeology to advance enough to reach it.
And the sources show that before the professionals arrived, the wreck site was treated like a giant underwater junkyard by the locals.
Oh, the early salvage attempts were horrifying.
There's this wild story from 1905 where a group of local Methodists on Norfolk Island decided they wanted to retrieve one of the ship's massive iron anchors from the reef.
And they didn't exactly use delicate methods?
No, they didn't use lift bags or careful excavation. They used dynamite.
Unbelievable.
They literally blasted an 18th century anchor off a coral reef to claim a 20-pound reward to pay off a church debt.
Just incredible.
That anchor is actually sitting in Macquarie Place in Sydney today, missing its flukes because the explosion blew them clean off. And then later, in 1973, a local crew just dragged another anchor up with a boat, nearly sinking themselves in the process.
It was reckless destruction disguised as salvage. It wasn't until the lead-up to the Australian bicentenary that professional maritime archaeology finally stepped in.
So when was this?
Between 1983 and 2002, the Western Australian Maritime Museum led 5 official, highly disciplined expeditions to the site. And we have to remember the environment they were working in.
Right, the same one that sank the ship.
Exactly. The sea conditions that physically destroyed the Sirius hadn't changed in 2 centuries. These modern dive teams were operating in incredibly dangerous, shifting sands, battling the same heavy swells coming straight off the Tasman Sea that doomed Captain Hunter.
But the payoff was staggering. They recovered over 6,000 artifacts from the reef, which are now housed in the HMS Sirius Museum on Norfolk Island.
Such a treasure trove.
They found heavy iron ballast, delicate brass sextants, and the 18-pounder carronades, those short-range smashing cannons you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And there's one specific archaeological detail in the reports that I find absolutely mesmerizing. They hoist one of these heavy iron carronades out of the ocean, and they notice there is a wooden campion, a plug, still hammered securely into the muzzle of the gun.
This part is amazing.
When the conservators carefully pull that wooden plug out, they find the inside of the barrel is crystal clean. It spent 2 centuries underwater in a violently shifting reef, and the interior is completely corrosion-free.
It functioned as a perfect watertight vacuum seal. Miraculous preservation.
So what does this all mean? I want to push you on this.
Yeah.
Because we've spent this time talking about the macro history, the fate of continent, the politics, the military, the rum economy. Why spend millions of dollars and risk diverse lives in dangerous surf just to find some brass fittings and an old cannon plug? Why does pulling this specific physical wreckage out of the sand actually matter to our understanding of the past?
This raises an important question about how we fundamentally interact with history. You know, when you read a textbook about the First Fleet or colonial administration, history can feel incredibly abstract.
Yeah, just words on a page?
Right. It's reduced to dates, sweeping policies, and the names of governors. But the wreck of the Sirius is an untouched, granular time capsule of Georgian naval life. When you look at that pristine carronade barrel, you aren't just looking at a piece of military technology. You are staring directly at the rigorous, everyday discipline of an unnamed gunner's mate.
A regular sailor whose specific job on a Tuesday morning in 1790 was to hammer that wooden plug in as tight as he possibly could.
Exactly. His physical labor, his specific attention to detail, reached across 200 years of violent ocean currents to preserve that metal.
That's a beautiful way to look at it.
These artifacts, the brass stove legs from the officers' quarters, the River Thames flint pebbles they use as ballast, the perfectly preserved cannon barrels, they bridge the massive gap between grand historical narratives and the daily lives of regular people.
Because it's tactile.
Yes, they make the past tangible, proving that the people on that ship weren't just names on a manifest. They were exactly like us, relying on the tools they had in their hands to survive an impossible, terrifying situation.
That makes the history feel incredibly immediate. And it brings me to one final artifact they pulled from the wreckage, one that completely upends the traditional image of a British naval shipwreck.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
Deep within the rotting timbers of this 18th century European warship, the divers found an Aboriginal stone hatchet.
A profound and unexpected discovery.
It certainly wasn't standard Royal Navy issue. The archaeologists analyzing the site believe this hatchet was likely traded, or perhaps taken, during that brief, intense window of time between the first fleet arriving in Sydney Cove and the Sirius wrecking on the reef at Norfolk Island.
It's a heavy thought.
I want you, listening to this, to just sit with that image for a second. An artifact created by the world's oldest continuous living culture, locked tightly inside the sunken flagship of a brand new, expanding empire. Two completely different worlds sitting quietly together at the bottom of the ocean, untouched for 2 centuries. It makes you wonder what other silent stories of first contact, of collision, and of human survival are still buried out there beneath the sand, just waiting to be found.
Makes you want to keep looking.
It really does. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the turbulent waters of colonial Australia. Keep asking questions, keep looking beneath the surface, and keep exploring history's hidden layers. We'll catch you next time.